Wonderful, wonderful. And thank you so very much for joining us. I see people are joining and waiting backstage for us to get started. So, good evening, Facebook friends, to our Instagram, Periscope, YouTube, and all of our social media family. Welcome to Couch Conversations with the Doctor. Well, it's all about health being wealth. That's what it's all about. It's all about health being wealth. Dr. Kim, there's your surprise that we have for you that just popped
Hey,
in. Yeah, so Monday night, what night is it tonight? It is Monday night, and Monday nights are what? Couch Conversations with the Doctors, where health is truly wealth. So come on in. Remember to share, 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 send those hearts and those likes, and know that we are here to share conversations. Remember, this broadcast is for information purposes only, and we are here to talk about your heart, that little thing that pumps and keeps everything moving through your body on today. So remember to come by, and if you are texting me, make sure that you please keep us healthy. We're going to go around our table as we usually do and just do some brief introductions of some people that we have here. As you can see, we have some great special guests here with us on tonight. I'm going to start with those introductions with my coworker, and that's Dr. Douglas Graham, my coworker. Doug, why don't you introduce yourself really quickly?
Good evening. I'm a physician who worked in the western suburbs for a number of years. I've retired and joined Danny Davis in his office as a congressional fellow. I'll try and answer your questions if I can.
Thank you so much, Doug. Thank you so much. To that infectious disease doctor extraordinaire, the one who thinks he's the a mini Wolfgang Puck, the professional who fries those perfect crisp, Dr. Pete Thomas. Why don't you introduce yourself really quickly?
hey, good afternoon, guys. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm excited about this conversation tonight. I am the Director of Medical Support Services at the Near North Health Service Corporation.
And to our family medicine doctor, who is the weight loss guru extraordinaire, and he's a keto specialist, but he is also a chef extraordinaire and a dad extraordinaire. That's Dr. Tony Hampton. Tony, why don't you introduce yourself really quickly?
All right, guys, family doctor, obesity doctor with Advocate Aurora Health, and very interested in making sure my audience live many more Christmas seas and Thanksgiving seas. We're trying to keep you guys around. So this is all about how do we optimize our health, and that's what I focus on.
Wonderful. And Dr. Pete, if you can introduce our guest, Dr. Everett, for us. If you could introduce him, that would be great.
Yeah, I gotta just give a shout out because we all went to school together. Tony and Marlon and myself, we went to Chicago Medical School. But he's a phenomenal cardiologist. He's chief of cardiology at Trinity Hospital. He's also an interventional cardiologist. So we're excited to have him here with us tonight.
Thank you so very much.
You went to the Chicago Medical School?
Yes, all three of us.
Oh.
Dr. Everett, say hi to everyone.
Hi, hi, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. I'm so glad that Dr. Pete invited me, and I'm excited.
So I want to say thank you to Leanne Harris and Kathleen Jackson for checking in, and they're saying good evening to everybody. Remember to share, 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 and to start those watch parties on your page. To Dr. Jasmine, that psychologist who keeps all of our kids and everybody on target, do a brief introduction of yourself, please.
Good evening. I am so happy to be here. I am a licensed clinical psychologist at Near North Health Service Corporation, which is a federally qualified healthcare agency in Chicago, Illinois, and I am happy to be here.
Wonderful, wonderful. And to Dr. James Miller, who says that I threatened him to make sure that he's here, but he knows I love him so. Dr. Miller, introduce yourself really quickly.
Hello, everybody. And my name is Dr. James Miller, and I'm so glad to join the conversation this evening. And we wish that everybody has been well and that you'll continue to be well.
Thank you so much. I want to say hey to Michelle Garrison and Bonnie Smetley for checking in, and Congressman, if you could do the honors of introducing our special guest on tonight, that would be great.
Well, it is indeed a pleasure and it's an honor, and I'm going to be very brief because we've got so many questions. I've seen the question list, but I want to thank everybody for being with us. I trust that we've all had a wonderful beginning of the holiday season. But Thanksgiving has been just fantastic. And we do have a special guest. All of our guests are always special, but we have a special, a renowned heart specialist. And I guess if you can keep your heart in shape, chances are you're going to be around a good little while. As a matter of fact, we often brag about the fact that one of the co-chairs of our ministers group has had 2 heart transplants and a kidney transplant. And he preaches every Sunday in his pulpit. And he has another business. He is a developer and he builds houses and repairs them. And he and his wife, daughter, and son took the bus trip with us when we took 10 busloads of people to Barack Obama's inauguration when he was elected. And they're just wonderful people. Good to see Dr. Terry Mason. But Dr. Kim Williams is the head of Heart Work, HEART, as well as HARD at Rush University, one of our outstanding medical centers. And we are just so pleased and delighted that he agreed to join with us this evening and lead our discussion. Dr. Kim, thank you so much, and we're delighted to have you.
So honored and thrilled to be here.
So, Congressman, do you just want us to get to those questions?
Yeah, I want to why don't we just ask him to kind of make some opening comments about the heart and what it means, and then go right into the question.
Okay. Dr. Kim, the floor is all yours.
Well, thanks. I'm more than happy to start off the discussion because I had a lot to try to share. This is a difficult time. Everyone now knows what a pandemic is. It's something that's happening all over the world. But what they didn't necessarily recognize is that we were already in a pandemic. We were in a pandemic of heart disease that had taken over the entire world. All the low and middle income countries, number one killer, much like it used to be in the United States and the Western world, heart disease. It turns out that the higher income countries, most of them have solved it, if you want to call it being solved, to fall to number 2 behind cancer deaths. But United States, going strong since the last pandemic of 1918, the Spanish flu, heart disease has been the number 1 killer of Americans. So we were talking a little bit earlier offline about life expectancy, and what's important to recognize that at 2015, heart disease stopped going down in the United States. Our CDC says that it's diabetes and obesity. And so that really comes down to nutrition. And so for the last, 8-10 years, I've been going around the world talking about heart health and nutrition, reducing diabetes, reducing hypertension, getting the cholesterol to go down and getting your weight to go down. And it turns out that those are some of the biggest factors that make a person have a difficult time with COVID. So a lot of people can get COVID and not get sick, and you've seen that. And some of them get a little bit of illness, but the ones, particularly in our communities of color, and it isn't the color. We have multiple studies, including what we've done at Rush, showing that it is not our race, it's our risk. That if we didn't have the extra weight, the higher blood pressure, the higher blood sugar, and the higher cholesterol, we would not be on a ventilator or having the mortality rate that we have. And so my message to everybody is clean up the diet. You can Google me, you can Google all of the journal, International Journal of Disease Reversal and Prevention, get all kinds of tips on how to do a whole food plant-based diet, which will actually lower all 4 of those things that we're concerned about, because they are co-occurrence. That is, the 2 pandemics are both revolving around the same 4 issues. So I'm hoping that everyone will look at, for example, the American College of Cardiology, American Heart Association prevention guidelines that outlines every single one of these factors and we can make a difference. We can start now. Yeah, we do have a vaccine coming. I'm hoping that everybody will have it in the next 6 months, but who's going to survive those next 6 months? It really should start today. It should start with your next meal. You want to eat today as if you want to live tomorrow. That's what I always tell my patients.
So Nikki, if you don't mind, I want to chime in, if you don't mind, before we get our questions started. And I particularly want to chime in because I love this idea of having two cardiologists and my esteemed friend, Dr. Mason. And I think I want to just kind of make a few comments because it feels like there's this fear of fat. So I want to start with that. And so, in 2002, we started doing research on low carb. We got people like Dr. Eric Westman and Dr. Jeff Bolick. Prior to that, we didn't really have randomized controlled trials that could really talk about. And for those who are listening, those are the quality studies. Historically, nutritional science has been based on epidemiological studies, which is really association, but not causation. And so, but now we've done these studies, and in 2013, we've done all these meta-analyses, and we have the Public Health Collaborative in the UK, and they have, 31 studies that show that the low-carb diet, just like the low-fat diet, can both reduce inflammation. And we now know that metabolic syndrome, not just cholesterol, it's the metabolic syndrome and inflammation that leads to heart disease. So I bring this up because the American Diabetes Association CEO got off of insulin doing a low-carb diet. The College of Cardiology just put out a position statement saying that fat's not the problem. The College of Obesity Medicine encourages people to consider this. So I guess my point is, I'm curious for all of you guys who are, low fat, which I definitely think works. But, if anybody wants to look up some science, the Diet Doctor, if you just search the science of low carb and keto and just talk, I'm with the Diet Doctor, I'm one of the low carb experts. And if you just look that up, there's plenty of evidence to say that both diets work. And my concern is that if we demonize not processed meat, we know that's garbage, but if we demonize regular meat without keeping in mind that there are tons of people who are doing really well metabolically with this low carb diet, I think we do a disservice to the public because we're not really giving them options. We need to let them know that there are more than one way. Clearly, Dr. Ornish and Esselstein's research is real. I believe in it. I was a vegetarian for 8 years, but I'm gonna be honest with you. Until I started being open to looking at things differently, that's when I moved the needle. And I take people off medicines every week. And they do it because they get off these inflammatory processed foods. So I guess my question is, and I don't want to just make this the whole conversation, is it possible that some of this new science is also giving us a window to being able to look at things slightly differently? Because I think we'll disenfranchise people if they only see one way. So that's kind of my question. Since you're a heart doctor, I got my buddy, Dr. Everett Kennedy. I actually am the regional director.
So let me answer that. So what I need you to make, I really need everyone to bifurcate, make really two different paths. When you're talking about what happens to weight and what happens with diabetes and even blood pressure, keto diets have been absolutely shown to reduce those factors. The problem that I have as a cardiologist, and I would just ask anyone who's interested, because you and I can talk about the data back and forth, but people ought to read it for themselves. And what they will, if they just Google 2 words, keto diet, mortality, what you're going to see is what I'm about to say is that it started in 2007 with the Greeks, and then it was the Japanese, and then it was the ERIC trial here in the United States. And every trial that's actually looked at it, and one of the most important one was actually in the Journal of American Heart Association, talking about people that I see who had had a previous heart attack. The range of increase in mortality, if you do this for a long time, not short term, but for a long time, and that would be 12, 18 months, is that it increases cholesterol and it absolutely increases the inflammatory markers. I would actually refer you to Carol Kirkpatrick's treatise on this from the National Lipid Association, specifically because I was like debating her and she was on the keto side. When she saw all the references and looked them up, she then got the NLA to actually do an entire treatise on it, which they did and published, coming to that conclusion. Blood pressure goes down, weight goes down, diabetes gets better, mortality goes up because of the increase in inflammation and LDL cholesterol.
How do you explain the College of Cardiology changing their position on fat?
No, we're talking about fat. I'm talking specifically about, and let me go into that for a little bit, and then I want to go back and finish what I was first talking about. When you talk about fat, there's different ones. Obviously, trans fats, thank goodness, the United States with Congressman Davis's help, that's now illegal. We don't have to worry about that one anymore. But saturated fat still increases cholesterol, is associated with higher mortality. Whereas, and I know I have these plant-based colleagues who say no fat, the fat you eat is the fat you wear. But the fact is, monounsaturated and polyunsaturated fats, actually, even if they do make you gain weight, they can actually improve your cholesterol. And the mortality data shown in the Nurses' Health is actually they're downwards as opposed to saturated fat going upwards. So it's not, all fat is not the same. There are four different ones, and it's really important to distinguish them. But getting back to the issue of low carb and keto, the ACC is not going to go against its own guidelines, which we published in March of 2019, that talks specifically about making sure that we lower all the risk factors, not just diabetes, hypertension, and weight, because cholesterol and inflammation are really important. So anyway, the point I was wanting about the Journal of American Heart Association article from 2 years ago clearly outlined it was a 53% increase in mortality if a person had a heart attack in the past and then did a keto diet. So, you know, if you're a healthy person, you have documented no coronary disease, and you wanted to do it for a short period of time, that would probably be okay. I know the vegan world will hate me for saying that. But the fact of the matter is, with short term, you may not have a problem. Long term, that area under your cholesterol curve and the inflammation is going to lead to more plaque erosion, more plaque explosion, more heart attack, stroke, and death.
All right. So I guess we'll just agree to disagree. But I do.
Let me be really clear. This is not me. I don't have. Right. I did a study with Dr. Mason. Right. Yeah. That's about the only. I'm a nuclear cardiologist. That's about the only time I have a study that's actually in. You know, is that the presented American Heart Association. I know what happens metabolically to people at Trinity United Church when you do a 5-week vegan. The rest of this stuff. These are other people. These are large data sets coming from other people. And if somebody publishes something that's 10 times larger and says that people don't die and all these studies are wrong, then I'll change my mind. Because all I'm doing is reading and reflecting. So I would just say, just Google.
You mean you go to Trinity too?
I would just say Google it, and if you see mortality and keto diet, and read the article. Seidelman was the most impressive one. The Seidelman article in Lancet Public Health. I mean, they're good authors. They're good reviewers. It's a good journal, and they were saying it was an 18% increase in mortality if you did a keto diet. But the interesting thing that they added is that there is a way to do a vegan keto, which I had never heard of, you know, like peanut butter and stuff like that.
Yeah,
that's an 18% decrease in mortality.
Yeah,
if you do it with plants, just don't do it with animals.
That's fair. And I won't comment any further, but I will say that resource that you just mentioned, Dr. Kim, my resource is the Public Health Collaborative, UK.org, or the Diet Doctor, and just search science and the keto and low carb. They had 31 studies they looked at, and all of them did really well against low fat. So my point is to make sure people, this is the last thing I'll say. I was a vegetarian for 8 years, right? And I was as hardcore as anybody. And I probably got 5 or 10% needle people to do it. And then I started doing this, and I just had a patient Monday last week who lost 80 pounds, and all her metabolic factors. In my career, I've had 2 people's cholesterol become abnormal while they've been doing this. So that may be anecdotal, but I'm just saying it's like, so I agree with you that we need to look at the science, but I just want to be clear. I'm here as a buffer, and I have had too much success to then believe that this doesn't work. And again, those studies will help people, but I hear what you're saying. And again, high-risk people, I do have high-risk people taking statins, and I have low-risk people probably not, because I do believe that the side effects sometimes outweigh the benefits. So I think I hear you, and I think you're saying that there's room for people depending on what they're looking for, so, and their risk profile.
I have a question.
Sure.
I have a question for Dr. Everett. One of our viewers wants to know what are troponin levels and what is its importance?
Yeah, so thanks for asking. I'm going to comment on what Dr. Hampton and Dr. Williams were speaking about earlier. But yeah, troponin levels are basically, so it turns out that whenever you lose heart muscle, which is essentially a heart attack, okay, there's a lot of different terms that people use for heart attacks. Bottom line is that we really define it as heart muscle damage, losing heart muscle. If I were to test, it turns out that when you lose heart muscle, there are enzymes that end up leaking into the blood, and we're able to test those. We just take some of your blood and test it. Most people should not have any detection of any sort of enzymes within their blood, unless troponin elevation, unless they've had some sort of heart damage. And what we're checking with troponin levels is to see if there's been any heart damage. And that's essentially it. Now, you're going to hear a lot of different people say the importance of troponin, whether it's high, whether it's low. The bottom line is that you shouldn't have any troponin elevation in the blood. There should not be any heart damage whatsoever. Now, we can say that there are lower levels and higher levels, obviously, depending on how bad the heart attack was, or how bad the heart damage was, or something that caused some sort of heart-related effects, such as blood clots in the lungs, strokes, different things like that can put a lot of stress on your body and cause the elevations in the enzymes. But at the end of the day, the troponin level in your blood should be not detectable, 0. And if we do detect it, that's a problem, and it needs more investigation.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. I just wanted to comment real quick because I know Dr. Hampton and Dr. Williams well, and much of the cardiology that I know is from Dr. Williams. And I can tell you he's been saying the same thing for as long as I've known him. I think, though, I have to take, I'm not an expert like either one of them, but I am an expert in medicine in the neighborhoods, I'll say. I practice on 93rd Street in South Chicago, in Jeffrey, essentially. And I can tell you that it is not easy to get either one of the diets that we're talking about, whether it's Dr. Williams's diet, or not his diet, but the one that he promotes, which I 100% believe he's right, and Dr. Hampton's diets that I think that he's right. But I'm going to tell you something anecdotally. As a doctor who basically kind of lived moderately, ate a little meat, ate a little this, ate a little that, was never as hardcore as my two mentors here from a nutrition standpoint. But I unfortunately did contract or caught COVID very early, March 15th, okay? And I had heard all this, over the years, but the one thing that went in my back of my mind is I said, you know what? I cannot let inflammation feed this virus.
That's right.
Cannot let it do it. As soon as I contracted, as soon as I found out that I was positive for COVID, strictly no pure plant-based diet, no question about it. Plant-based, only fruits, and I swear, believe it or not, I got better within a day and a half. Fevers went away. I felt better, and so every patient that I've told that said, that develops COVID, I said, keep the inflammation away. So I really do believe that if you can eat as close as you can to a plant-based diet, or to the diets that Dr. Hampton and Dr. Williams are referring to, as close as you can. I realize that it's not easy, people. It's not easy to go to the grocery store and prepare all your foods. I remember being in training with Dr. Williams, and he was one of the few doctors that brought his lunch every single day. And I'm talking about in the late 90s. Okay, he's done it for 25 years probably or longer. But he's right. And so I became a believer, unfortunately, by my own illness. But I do believe inflammation does exist, and we need to fight it.
Glad you guys do it.
We want to say Thank you for stopping by and stopping in to Cassandra Galloway, Marvelous Harris, Sean Kennedy, Carrie Steele, to Mariana Sparopoulos, Audrey Jacobs, Karen Yarbrough, Alderman Pat Dow, to Kathleen Johnson, who says, "Hi, Dr. Kim. You are my husband's cardiologist. Excellent, doctor." To Kiva Cole, to Lorenzo Burton, Lacey Harris, Chicago Police Department's very own, Dorothy Goldsmith, Karen Peterson. Thank you guys so much for stopping in. You know, Pete, I think that next question said, what is atrial fibrillation? So don't all attack it at one time. What's atrial fibrillation?
Dr. Kim, you want to take that one?
Sure. So, yeah, just imagine that of chaos. You know, people running around, in all different directions. That's what happens. That is chaos within the atrium. The atrium is the upper chamber. There's one on the left side. There's one on the right side. And when a person typically has some sort of problem, it could be inflammation, actually, like we were discussing. And there is a little bit of data about plant-based diet getting rid of atrial fibrillation. I'd like to see more because I'm more of a skeptic. And it turns out that anything that increases the pressure in either atrium, so a person having high blood pressure on the left, that would affect your left atrium, a valve problem on the left side, or something on the right side, that is the part that's feeding your lung. If you have high blood pressure in your lungs, you have a clot that goes from your leg and ends up in your lung and raises the pressure, that stretch of the atrium can make the chaos happen. So it's really important, and this is why you see those commercials, do you have AFib? It's because it's one of the leading causes of stroke. Because you can imagine what would happen if you have blood in a tube and it's flowing, it's fine. And if that tube stops or you put it in a cup, it's going to clot. And so when your atrium is fibrillating, it's actually not emptying well. And so what we try to do is blood thinners if the person is at high risk for a stroke. And that risk has to do with pretty much all women, anyone over the age of 65, anyone with high blood pressure, heart failure, diabetes, or a prior stroke, they really need those blood thinners. Things that have happened recently that have been sort of game changers would be twofold. One would be that our electrophysiologists, the electricians of the heart world, have figured out how to, with a high degree of accuracy, probably 80–85% of the time it works, go in through the leg, a procedure that goes across from one atrium to the other, and then puts a freezer burn in specific locations in the atrium, and you can so-called ablate the atrial fibrillation. The other one is if a person is far gone because they've had it for too long and the procedures are not likely to help, you could actually put what's called a Watchman device. It's a little plug that actually you go through that same method, go across from one atrium to the other, and then put a plug-in device in a portion of the atrium that collects clots. And then it doesn't collect clots. And then a person who's at high risk for fall. I mean, I always tell my patients, no knife and bottle fights. You're on a blood thinner, and teaching them to be careful. But people will, particularly older people, will have catastrophes. They'll trip. Have a nice trip. See you next fall. It's really it can be very serious to fall and when you're on a blood thinner. And so people who are at high risk from the blood thinner, we actually do try to get them to plug up that atrium so that they're not going to have the stroke.
Dr. Kim and Everett, if you have atrial fibrillation, does that mean you will always have it, or can it go away?
No. So one thing about atrial fibrillation is that Dr. Williams didn't mention is that it really is a nuisance. What I mean by that, it doesn't kill you usually. It can cause a stroke. But it is one of the issues in cardiology that we see that just can come and go and come and go. So it becomes problematic. It can. So your question is, will you always have it? Mm-hmm. No, you may not always have it. I think that to Dr. Williams' point, the newer treatments in terms of the ablation or the freezing of the different chambers or the electrical impulses in the heart, you can freeze them and kind of short circuit them. That can actually help and actually cure atrial fibrillation. So, but in general, though, it can be a problem. It can come and go. I have some patients who have it once and never have it again, and then I have some patients who may have it 10 to 15, 20 times, on and off, on and off. And don't be alarmed, because there are a lot of people who actually live with atrial fibrillation. They do fine, as long as we can control their heart rate, and most importantly, reduce their risk of stroke with blood thinners. I think that's probably they can do fine, just like many of the people that we see in the office are doing fine, living with atrial fibrillation. So it's not necessarily permanent, but it's pretty common.
I just want to make one quick comment, just from an obesity medicine perspective. So everything that we do in traditional medicine allows us to make interventions, and we need those. That's why we're one of the leaders in the world. But as a person sitting at home listening to us, the question is, what can I do today? And when I was doing my obesity boards, I learned that the atria, which you have an atrium and a ventral, but the cells in the atrium, the atria, and they become dysfunctional, as Dr. Kim, they get all, crazy, and they're just irritated. So I think it's clear evidence from what I learned is that there's a lot of inflammation, and we've been using inflammation as our key word for everything. So if those atria get inflamed, they're probably not going to function. And some of them get really bad and they progress to fibrosis, where they get, that skeletal structure that keeps, just like the structures in the concrete, when they put those little things down, that skeletal structure can get, can be affected. But the bottom line is this. If the stat that blew my mind when I was in my training was, if your BMI is 25, that's your baseline risk for AFib. If it goes up to 26, it goes up 4%. If it goes up to 27, it goes up another 4%. And it goes up 4% for every BMI over baseline. So what that tells me, whether it's reversible or not, I need to reduce my BMI. So my call to everybody listening, that's the one thing you can do. Rather you do low carb or low fat, it doesn't matter. Get your BMI down, and then you'll reduce inflammation. And if there's a chance of reversing that condition before it gets to progress, you'll have a chance.
I've got a question. I'm going to be voting Friday on something called the Moore Act. And of course, this person asked the question, is there a link between smoking and heart disease, and does it apply to marijuana? Of course, the Moore Act is marijuana. So I need an answer to that.
Can I weigh in on that one? It's because it's really important. I haven't seen so much of a disconnect between public policy and health. I don't think ever. I know I'm always telling people to Google 2 words. This one is a surprise. Please, everyone, do this. Marijuana stroke. Mm-hmm. And what you will see is that there is a huge increase in strokes that happen to younger people when they're doing marijuana. Now, obviously, these are observational trials. No one's doing a prospective randomized trial on marijuana. And so maybe it's the paper, maybe it's the smoking of it. Maybe if you eat it, it's not so bad. But the fact of the matter is, if you will see multiple literature going back to the 90s saying that it increased stroke. And so I wasn't clear on how this became, legalized when there was a big health risk like that.
Great. Anybody else want to weigh in? Come on, Dr. Mason.
No, I just wanted to, first of all, it's always good to see Dr. Williams, and I'm looking forward, and my other colleagues. It's always good to see. But one of the things that we talked about on the radio this weekend was this perceived, at least reported, almost 25% decrease in emergency room visits for people with heart disease or heart issues. Yeah. And that what was happening is that people are electing, if they're having chest pain, they're electing not to come to the emergency room because they're afraid they're going to get COVID, or maybe their doctors told them, or maybe because they went to get a procedure, a hip done, and they said, oh no, we can't do your hip right now, not understanding about elective procedures. So I just wanted to know if any of my cardiology or even primary care colleagues have seen that. And secondly, I want to say to Dr. Kim Williams, Dr. Tony Hampton and I had a very good conversation. We agreed to disagree, and that's where we left it. So, but I still love him, I still love him. And then, and in terms of why Dr. Williams was at Trinity, to your other question, and hopefully we'll get back with a second study, but Dr. Williams will tell you that in the people that follow the Lenten diet, for what we did for this Lent, which was just about 40 days, we saw dramatic decreases in inflammatory markers. For example, TMAO dropped almost 41%. And we had other markers that dropped. So this is just on, and this is a very short. In fact, when I showed the data, Dr. Williams, to Dr. Paul Jones, he suggested that we put people on these diets in the acute phase right after MIs. If we could alter the course. Yeah, so that's what he was saying, that people on plant-based diet immediately after MI to see if that would be helpful. So I want to leave with that.
Absolutely. I got to follow that one up because this is actually how I got into this space. It was the Association of Black Cardiologists. I was at a meeting, and Taswell Banks, who ran DC General and ran the coronary care unit, and he put everybody on a vegetarian diet, and he swore that not one person had a recurrent event. Whereas, recurrent events is our lifeblood financially, and so, but I was shocked by it. And ultimately, when I found out my own cholesterol was high, I kind of heard his voice in the back of my head saying, that plant-based diet is where to go. And sure enough, it dropped mine. But more importantly, he was a leader. And so I did want to throw that out there because it was mentioned how difficult it is for people to change their diet. Actually, the Association of Black Cardiologists has a booklet. It's called it has a recipe book. It's called the Heart and Soul Recipe Book, and you can download it. Don't download the PDF for free. Nobody's going to charge you anything, and you will end up having a variety of methods to take what you're doing now and turn it into healthy.
Could you comment on that decrease in people presenting to emergency?
Oh, yeah. No, yeah, we did see that. But as you know, Rush University became famous worldwide for the fact that it was built, if I could take 60 seconds and explain it. Rush was actually built with federal and state money to handle disasters. It was the idea came out after September 11, 2001. And then Katrina, and there are big things like water tanks under the buildings. But the one thing that's really remarkable is they could take an endoscopy suite or a recovery room, and within 2 hours, it becomes an intensive care unit. And so we had the ability to surge up to 175 ICU beds. And so at the peak of COVID in the spring, we never got to 175, but we got close. As far as I know, someone could correct me, we got to 173. We were taking transfers from all over the city, particularly when people said that they didn't have the capacity to do like ventilators with proning. Then we would take them, put them on extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, a procedure that can save someone's life when they have no lungs. And so all of that took over, and you're absolutely right. We had to shut down our elective procedures. It wasn't just cardiology, it was just general surgery, everything. We shut it down. And the people were not coming for it. And they were afraid to go out, and people would just suffer. The data does show that there was an increase in at-home mortality because of this. And hopefully at this point, people are coming back. We've opened up with this next surge. We are opening the ICUs, but we're keeping everything else going as best we can because these are critical services. COVID is a horrible thing, but it's not the only thing. And we need to take care of our patients.
Yeah, and I just want to impress to our audience that I agree. And everyone was COVID scared, where they wouldn't want to come. They didn't want to come to the hospital. We saw that in the spring, but I'm hoping now that they understand that they can come to the hospital and really not get COVID. I mean, you can still come to the hospital and not get COVID, but I think a lot of people were really not going to the emergency room because they're afraid of COVID. And we were seeing a number of, there's lots of studies in New York and the different cities where patients were dying at home instead of dying in the hospital, just because of the fear of coming to the hospital. So I hope that our audience doesn't heeds to this advice that if you are having problems, chest pain, short of breath, those type of things, could it be COVID? Yes. Could it be a heart attack? Yes. I think that's important for you to think that and come to the hospital.
Hey, Dr. Everett, that's a great lead in. One of our audience members says, can COVID affect the heart? And if so, how?
Yeah, there's a number of reasons why. And it's really viral inflammation, most likely. What we're seeing, COVID is a virus, and we talked about at length of inflammation, what inflammation can do. And what we're seeing are just a number of people who are having these troponin, we talked about that earlier, small heart attacks, for lack of better words. It's a small heart attack. You've lost some heart muscle when you were affected by COVID, whether that was a bad pneumonia from COVID, whether that was the virus actually attacking the heart and causing damage to the heart muscle, whether that was just profound dehydration, whether that was a stroke that we know has been seen in COVID, whether there's been blood clots, which have been tremendously prevalent, blood clots in the lungs, tremendously prevalent with COVID. And we're seeing that type of stress cause damage in the heart. So directly and indirectly, yes, we do believe that the virus can lead to heart damage.
Okay, wow. Dr. Kim, Linda Johnson asked a question. She said, going back to AFib, Dr. Kim, will you need a pacemaker? And what may cause AFib?
So the one time that we actually end up needing a pacemaker is the fancy term called tachybrady syndrome, which is kind of Greek for fast and slow. You get an older person, goes into atrial fibrillation, and they are going really fast at times. And when you put them on the drugs to control the heart rate, then the heart rate falls, and it falls so low that they can't take the drugs. And so you take them off and they go fast again, and then you put and back and forth. Those you can actually solve with a pacemaker. You can have the pacemaker as a backup and then give all the drugs that you need safely. But they really are separate electrical issues other than that one sort of condition. There are several conditions that, when your conduction system starts to go bad, you do have a tendency to have more atrial fibrillation because the atrium likes to be told what to do. And if the regular rhythm isn't happening, that's when it can start to get a little bit more chaotic. And fact is, atrial fibrillation begets atrial fibrillation.
Wonderful. Well, Chris Hogan says, great medical crew. Bonnie Schmetley says, great information. Elaine says, thank you for coming before us and answering and sharing valuable and useful information. We truly appreciate you, great doctors. Bless you all. And Linda Hayes says, great information. Our next viewer had a really good question. She said, I read somewhere that heart disease is one of the biggest killers in African American women. Is this true, and why?
So if I can talk a little epidemiology here, and I don't want to isolate it just to women. The problem that we've had with African American women has to do a lot with the structural racism, and I'm not sure that we've addressed it all. But there was a New England Journal of Medicine article that people can look up by Schulman, where you're not going to believe this if you haven't read this article. You take 8 actors and you give them all the exact same story, the exact same hand motions. 2 are old, 2 are young, 2 are white. 4 are white, 4 are black. You've got male and female. So it's 8 people. All right. And you give this to a bunch of doctors, watch the video and see if they do the proper response. Is, yeah, this is unstable angina. We better take this person in and do an angiogram. That proper response, if you use the white males as the standard, 40% less in women and 40% less in blacks. So who got the worst shake of it was African American women. So part of it is that what we have in men is almost the opposite thing. They're not cared for, but they tend to present late. And men who don't have a woman telling them to go in tend not to. And so we have to take care of ourselves a little better, and then we have to have the system recognize bias. And that intrinsic bias really does play out in so many different ways in our medical system. Okay, so with that as a background, then we put the risk factors in that we talked about for COVID. And sure enough, before COVID, we had a 21% increase in cardiovascular mortality. I'm always complaining about heart disease being the #1 killer of Americans. If we just got the African American rate down to the rate of other races, heart disease wouldn't be #1 anymore. So we need to focus on our community, let everyone know what the risk factors are. And I have one more thing to talk about. Everybody hear the coronary calcium score? See a lot of heads going up and down. It's a very useful screening procedure. We just did an analysis that says that it's very difficult. If you're not at Marlon Everett's place on the south side of Chicago or at University of Chicago, you actually can't get it, okay? And if you do, other than Marlon's place, the price is higher than it is in the rich community. Why is that?
Yeah.
So, we're really talking about coronary calcium scoring to identify risk because it is one of the things that changes people's approach. Oh my gosh, look at all that calcium. I better take my medication. I better do my exercise. I better fix my diet. It actually does have literature behind it. It's the one test that changes people's behavior. And it's something we don't have as much in the Black community. And when we do have it, it's more expensive. It's more expensive. And that's ridiculous. So I would like everybody to understand the power of a calcium score, and you should be scored. You shouldn't be ignored.
Dr. Kim, could you just describe that in greater detail so they understand what it is and how to measure the calcium?
Yeah, believe it or not, there's a movie about this on Netflix. It's not about African Americans. It's about the whole thing of, it's from 5 years ago. Things have gotten a little better since then, but the background is really good. It's called Widowmaker. Everyone should take a look at it and understand exactly what this test is about. But the fact of the matter is it's very recently, even though it's an older test, it's very recently gotten sort of approved by all of our guidelines as something to assess risk. And the most important part, we were talking about, Dr. Hampton was mentioning statins and how the side effects. We actually started pulling statins away once we knew that there were people who had a high cholesterol but a low risk. And one of the ways of assessing that risk is a coronary calcium score. So a patient tells me, no, I don't want the statin. I say, okay, let's do the calcium score. And if it's 0, you're almost cardiovascularly immortal for the next decade. It doesn't last forever, but you have so little plaque in your arteries. Now, it's not perfect because the more dangerous plaque is the one that doesn't have calcium in it. And so the calcium score is actually scoring the more stable plaque, interestingly enough. But the more stable plaque you have, pretty much the more unstable plaque you have too. And that's why there is a correlation between the score that you get on the CT scan. It's very inexpensive. The reason it's a big deal to me and the reason we started this project was because it was self-pay. And if I tell my CEO of a company at downtown Chicago that I need you to pay $100 for a test, they're going to do it. And if I tell one of my patients from the south side of Chicago where I grew up and they're choosing between food and rent, the calcium score is just not going to happen. And so it's one of those things that it would be amazing as a tool. But right now, I think it's actually increasing healthcare disparities.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay,
you want to go right ahead.
Yeah, I want to just piggyback on what Dr. Williams said because he's exactly right. I think it's really important for us to keep in mind about this calcium score. So let me just explain what it is. The heart's a big muscle. Okay, everyone knows that it's a big muscle, and it has fuel lines like engines. Like an engine has fuel lines that goes inside of it. Well, the heart has fuel lines, which are called the coronary arteries. The arteries are bring oxygen and nutrients by blood into the heart. And if there's any sort of blockages, in theory, you can have problems. It can lead to heart attacks. It can lead to heart failure and different issues. So what we've done with the calcium score is essentially we've been able to, and I've had this myself as well, is we've been able to just have you sit under a CAT scan and look for not blockages per se, but look for a surrogate marker of blockages, which is calcium. Because when there's plaque buildup in the heart arteries, it will often mature and turn into calcium. It's a simple way. So in other words, if you've had blockages and you didn't, and they didn't really bother you that much, but they're still there, you may have now calcium in your heart arteries, and that is a somewhat of a surrogate marker for us to say, you know what, this person has a fair amount of calcium in their heart arteries or the fuel lines of the heart. And that being said, maybe they have blockages, and then you'd have to discuss this with your doctor, and maybe they'll do some more tests, or maybe not. Or like Dr. Williams said, maybe you don't have anything, and we say, you know what, maybe a statin, you don't need a statin despite having high cholesterol. So I think it's tremendously important. I'm going to plug our institution, and that we do offer it, and all of the advocate hospitals offer it for $49. Now it is cash pay, but it's $49.
That's the lowest in the area.
Yeah, and it is one of the best things you can do. I've sent all of my family members to get this calcium score. It does not require an IV. It is, it's fast, quick, and if you have some calcium, if you have no calcium, great. If you have some calcium, then we have to kind of figure out what we're going to do with it. But it's something that I think everyone should at least think about. Now, if you have heart disease, then it's probably not a lot of value. Yeah. But if you don't have heart disease, it's really a screening tool. One of the best things that we have out in cardiology now.
You can get something for $49.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, Congressman Davis, that you're on here, because in Texas, the state legislature actually demanded that insurance companies pay for it because of something that happened to a state senator. Well, it would be great to have that nationally, because like I say, the wealthy, the middle class, no problem. The poor people, they're being denied.
Well, let me ask this question, if I might. Does anybody know who came up with this commercial that says, "I'm leaving. I can leave anytime I want to. And if you don't treat me better, I'm out of here. When I go, you go." I think that's the most effective commercial I've ever heard. It scares me to death every time I hear it, and I start checking. So I mentioned that in terms of the value of health education as a part of the treatment process, and the extent to which health education is built into the training of physicians to do as much of that as possible.
I want to comment first real quick. That's the key, is what you said. The last thing you said, if the clinicians, particularly in primary care, are not telling their patients, by the way, we have a $49 test. Yes, I need to convince you to spend your money. That could make your cholesterol test seem insignificant, because we're going to go and look at a test that'll tell you exactly where you stand. And rather you decide to take this approach or that approach, you know where you stand. So we really need our health systems, and our clinicians to engage in an understanding that there's tremendous value. And I'm not sure, I mean, literally before I started my nutrition master's program and some of the stuff I've been doing, I didn't really know the value of a coronary artery calcium score. I mean, it's been around forever. Maybe my cardiology colleagues did. So we really need the people who are paid to lead people and to coach people, to tell them about these tests and then convince them that they're worthy of their investment.
Hey, I'm sure my colleagues appreciate this. I saw a patient today who came in to start medication to treat Hep C. I noticed her blood pressure was 185 over 115. And I said, so tell me about this blood pressure. And then she's like, oh, I stopped taking my medicine a year ago. And I said, okay, so let me get this straight. You're about to take a medicine to prevent the fibrosis of the liver that will eventually prevent liver cancer 10 years from now, but you might die of a heart attack in the next 3 months. And so we talked our way through it to get her to understand, we got to make decisions that are reasonable. And so we talked about what her problem with the blood pressure was. But to your point, Dr. Hampton, and Congressman, I think we have to train our physicians to have real conversations with our patients, because they're the ones that's making these decisions unbeknownst to us. And there was 3 blood pressure medicines on this lady's medication list, but she wasn't taking them.
Right. And by the way, real quick, our health system, I'm plugging like Dr. Everett did. When we are making decisions, our medical record will have best practice advisories to tell us you need to consider doing this for this patient. Now, whether you look at it or not is up to you, but it's almost like it's a red. And now we're moving towards a model where you almost have to address it before you can finish that chart. So we're trying to, so in other words, we have to kind of help our docs and our advanced practice clinicians to do better work, because they're just trying to get through the visit. That's the reality. If I have 15-minute appointments, and so I have to get through the visit, but I can't not serve my patients well. And we need the whole system to engage.
Yeah, I agree, Dr. Hampton, and Congressman Davis, you're correct. I think that one of the issues is that many of us get callous, physicians and patients. You get used to you. So, my mother and father had high blood pressure, no big deal. Right. I've had it for so many years, no big deal. And I think that is one of the problems. And on the flip side, when the doctor says the last 7 patients that have come into my office have had high blood pressure, and I tried to get the first few of them down to a blood pressure that is a guideline, such as like 130/80, but I couldn't do it. So I just kind of worked with the patient and said, you know what, get it if you can, get it if you don't can. And I think that that's one of the issues, that health education is important, because it clearly weighs on our health system from a monetary standpoint, no question about it. And high blood pressure is a big deal. People will have high blood pressure for years, and then they end up having a stroke. Now they didn't die, but yet they are debilitated, and that is tremendous cost on our health system. So now they're 94 years old, had a stroke at the age of 74. We've had to take care of them for 20 years, and at $100,000 a person per, from a public health standpoint, it's an issue. I think the callousness, though, is a big deal.
So can I just jump on there if I can, because it's so important. I think everybody needs to understand, because we have talked about obesity and diabetes, and we talked about high cholesterol a little bit and coronary disease. But if you look globally, it's hypertension that drives most of the cardiovascular death around the world. And to amplify Dr. Everett's point, before COVID, Medicare was supposed to go bankrupt in 2026 without a big lift from Congress. And I know, Doctor, that's weighing heavily on Congressman Davis's mind, because now, as they say, it's 2024. If you looked at the number of beneficiaries who have X diseases, it turns out that hypertension is the number one. It was 58% of all beneficiaries before the guideline committee. I learned so much being on that guideline. Sure, I contributed a little bit, but I got more out of it than I gave, I'm sure. When we changed the diagnosis to 130/80, and not just for initiation of treatment, but for the target, that increased that number of people who had hypertension substantially. Now, what we didn't do is increase the number of people who needed drugs a whole lot, because we were really pushing lifestyle, exercise, diet, decreasing alcohol, decreasing weight, drop the sodium in your diet, and increase the potassium in your diet. If you do those things, the number of people who are actually going to need more drugs is actually relatively small. But this is something that everyone needs to have. The other major emphasis points of the 2017 guidelines, where everybody should be doing blood pressures at home. The blood pressures in the office may or may not be reflective. We get people whose blood pressure is high in the office, so-called White Coast hypertension. And what I wasn't aware of is that the place where I grew up in Gresham, there'll be a lady afraid because there's whatever going on in her neighborhood. And she comes to Rush, and I'm an hour behind, sitting in a beautiful place, and her blood pressure could be 30, I'm not kidding you, 30 millimeters lower in my office than it is at home. That's called masked, uncontrolled hypertension. And it's a problem of our community. And so everyone needs to be doing so-called ambulatory blood pressures, do them at home, bring them to your doctor. Having your doctor tell you the blood pressure is totally wrong. It's out of the 1990s. Okay, so please measure your own blood pressure. And when people do that, they adhere to their medication a lot better if they actually are aware of what they've got going.
Wow.
Very simple, very simple. Just do your blood pressures at home on a monitor and bring the monitor in. There's a memory on it, and we can see the last 50 blood pressures. But it's important. I agree.
And I see the text messages coming and the other inbox messages that you're sending. The time is drawing near, and can we have a part 2? So I know this has come up with a couple of our segments before, so I'm going to ask, can we have a part 2 just about this subject next week? Can we finish it? Because we have so many questions, so many that are coming. This is, people are asking, so you should see the questions that are coming. So Dr. Kim, if you can find just one more hour in your schedule, same next week, and you as well, Dr. Everett, if you can, it would be great. This is just a hot topic. But here's our last question for the evening. Can outside stressors affect your heart, such as worry, heartbrokenness, or bereavement? Dr. Kim, if you and Jasmine can probably tag team on that a little bit.
Yeah, so it turns out that the underlying blood pressure, you name it, eating habits, all of them respond to stress. There is a hormone called cortisol, and then your adrenal glands get your catecholamine or adrenaline levels going up. Your blood pressure goes up, your heart rate, the amount of oxygen that your heart needs, all of this gets worse. Cortisol is very interesting as a steroid. It actually just makes you more centrally obese. And as Dr. Tony will tell you, when you get obese, you can get sleep apnea. And that could give you atrial fibrillation and worsen your blood pressure. And almost everything we've talked about tonight would actually be worsened by that. And so, yes, we need multiple ways of decreasing stress. Some people do transcendental meditation. Some people just do prayer. But the fact of the matter is that we all need something to try and decrease those levels of what we call counter-regulatory hormones that we really don't need to have in our bodies. You're on mute, Dr. Jasmine. We so want to hear what you
Yes. You know what, Dr. Kim, you see these, I have this skeleton right here in my office, and I have this brain right here. The mind and body are connected. It's so powerful. And like Dr. Kim said, I can see a patient who goes to the emergency room over and over because their response or their body's response to stress is mimicking a heart attack or panic-like symptoms. And they come to me and say, Dr. Searcy, everything has been ruled out. And I really have to talk about how stress manifests within our mind and body, as well as anxiety management. And they come to me for some good old cognitive behavioral therapy or mindfulness, prayer, or meditation, and learn additional strategies. But that was perfect, Dr. Kim.
So absolutely. Yep. I'm sorry, was somebody about to say, Dr. Miller, were you about to say something?
No, it was me. Because you have so many physicians here, that physician stress right now is at the highest level that it's ever been. And we actually came to Congressman Davis a few weeks ago asking for help with a bill specifically designed after one of our physicians had committed suicide on the East Coast, trying to get more emphasis on physician well-being. And it's true of many, many healthcare workers. So I just wanted to say, if stress is on the table, we all have to recognize it in us and reach out for help. Rather than just trying to deal with it like we always do in the past.
Dr. Miller?
Absolutely. Yeah.
I was only trying to get into conversation in terms of health education and the amount of misunderstanding that is creating and not allowing our patients to benefit or causing additional problems. And yes, I agree that it is definitely the doctor's responsibility to educate their patient. But I think in our healthcare system or outside of our healthcare system, in some other way, we have to figure out a better way to educate people about health. I mean, it needs to start when they're young, before they begin to develop all these in-organ damages. Unless as a society we begin to change our approach, just as it's important to learn other kinds of necessities about those things and why they're important, we need to begin to train our young folks as they're growing up so that they can grow old with these ideas and understanding, so that they can approach things a lot different than and maybe prevent them from getting some of the problems that we're seeing that maybe won't even come to us as physicians if they are approached the right way from the time of youth.
It's great that you would share that, Dr. Miller, because Sergeant Daniel Allen of the Chicago Police Department, who actually is an adamant viewer every Monday night, also has a youth group where he's the president at called Divine Purpose in Youth. He actually sits all of his youth down at their computers and they watch this so they can learn more about being healthy and staying healthy. So I just think it was great that you said that. It was just simply wonderful that you shared. You know, on every Monday night, people are so happy that we said part 2 because they are actually just chiming in. If you can see the Facebook comments here, they're saying, yes, thank you for part 2. And this is great. So we got to have our part 2. And we'll talk to the congressman because we have something else scheduled for next Monday. But I mean, this has just been such a hot topic until we just got to hold on and get some of these more important questions answered. Before we end, each Monday, we have 2 things that we do adamantly. And one thing is we always ask the question, what are your thoughts until next Monday? So Dr. Mason, what's your until next Monday?
I think that one of the things that we got to add to this conversation is the impact of the commercialization of our food system and the impact that advertising, because we always dump this responsibility on the patient, and it is not theirs alone. There are a lot of things very purposefully that are steering their tastes, that are creating bad foods to be marketed very cheaply. So I think that at some point we need to talk about where's corporate responsibility in health, and why isn't it that we are not policing them the way we should be policing them, because they're partly responsible for what we're seeing.
All right, Dr. Mason. Absolutely, because I don't want Cocoa Puffs until I see that commercial, and I'm not even a cereal eater. It's just something about it. You're right. You're absolutely right. Dr. James Miller, you're until next Monday.
I just want to say amen to Dr. Mason, because there seemed to be that profit is seemed to be more important than anything else, and it is also as much a killer for the general population as all these other things, because people would not do certain things if they weren't enticed, and so the commercial, the enticement to get people to eat and drink the wrong thing and to do the wrong things are just so part of what we need to do as a society, we got to figure out ways to combat that in terms of educating the public, and in terms of putting in some kind of restraint measures to stop some of the marketing to people that are giving and selling to them bad ideas and bad habits.
Douglas Graham, you're until next Monday.
Well, I'm saying ask your doctor what you can read, because there's lots of information that's out on the internet in different places. Your doctor may know some resources that you can read to better understand your medications and your problems.
All right, Dr. Tony Hampton, you're until next Monday.
Well, I think it's very simple, and I really enjoyed the collaboration. And I definitely encourage anybody who had not seen me and Dr. Terry Mason have a conversation on Protecting the Nest podcast. Check it out. It was definitely cordial. No blood was spilled. So it was a nice. Although it wasn't a tip, trust me. So it was a good conversation. What I would say is measure your risk. And I think I really appreciate the coronary artery calcium score being brought up by my cardiology colleagues. We have metabolic measurements, things that we can measure in your blood. So look at those numbers in your blood. Look at the numbers, check out the coronary, and then figure out what your why is. Why do you want to be healthy? Is it because you want to be thinner? You don't want to be on pills, or because you want to be present for your family? And once you have a why, you'll then be incentivized. And I will put their picture on the wall if it's a family member. And you can use that to keep you aligned with that goal. This is not hard. There are all these people in the world accomplishing great things. Why not you? It's very possible. You're special. God made you special. So let's get to the business of healing in the next year.
So Dr. Hampton, I gotta say, our listeners are still talking about the no bloodshed between you and Dr. Mason. They are also talking about Dr. Mason making a statement that a chicken does not have a chance in the community. So those are the two hot topics that they are still talking about. Dr. Everett, you're until next Monday.
Yeah, I have a couple of them. I think that the first thing I want to say is, so I always think of this as, some of the people they say that have the best credit are ones that open up the bills that come to in the mail. If you just let the bill sit on the table, then you probably will never know that there's a bill because you're kind of pushing it to the side. The exact same thing happens in health. You have to know your numbers. And what numbers are we referring to? We're talking about blood pressure. We're talking about cholesterol. We're talking about your A1C, which is to know if you're diabetic or not, to see how well your diabetes is. So it's one of the things that we just can't push under the rug. You have to know those numbers to be successful. And I think that if there's one thing I can impress on our audience this week, think of one way that you can get, and I'm also a pragmatist now, okay? And we can't do everything in 1 week. So choose one of those numbers right there, blood pressure, diabetes A1C, or cholesterol, and find out what those are and think about it so we can discuss it next week.
Absolutely. Dr. Kim, right before you give your until next Mondays, I want to share. A couple years ago, we came to visit you in your office, and you did a presentation. And I want to thank you for changing my outlook about my blood pressure. I was determined at that point to make some changes. The day I walked out of there and went back to the office, not only did I change some things, I changed some people, and it made a complete difference. So I thank you. And what are your until next Monday?
Well, so if I'm ever asked to give an overview, I have to start with the country. And the way this is going, the trajectory of the obesity epidemic, we are really headed for a financial disaster. Our people are writing checks with their dietary habits, their bodies and their finances cannot cash. And so what we really need to do is not just think about all the drugs and all the doctors and all the ways of trying to get around, doctor, please give me a pill so I can go back and do what brought me here to see you in the first place. What I want you to do is think of turning off the faucet. Don't just expect us to mop up the floor. We have some great mops. Okay, no question. We have some great mops, particularly in cardiology. But let's turn off the faucet. And so I'm asking everybody until next Monday to do very similar to what Dr. Tony is saying. Just think about it. How sick do you want to be? How long do you want to live? Okay. And let me ask you this one question. Is there any food that tastes better than your health?
Oh, that's deep.
Question.
All right, Bishop. We're gonna collect an offering for Dr. Kim behind that one. That's offering worthy right there. Dr. P. Ooh. Dr. P, you're until next month.
Just that, we're in the middle of a pandemic. I just want to encourage everybody. I can see that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. We have a vaccine that's a couple of vaccines that are on the market or potentially on the market. And so I just want to encourage people to take care of themselves, wear their masks, wash their hands, don't allow the current politics to play a role in their health, to Dr. Kim's point. And I can't wait till the vaccine come out because I'm going to be first in line to get it.
All right, Congressman, our vanguard of healthcare, our fearless leader, the one who constantly instills in us that if you want true wealth, it begins with health. You're until next Monday.
Well, Nikki has already put the bag on next week. So I'm just going to reinforce that because there are a lot of questions that have gone unanswered. And I always feel so refreshed and reinvigorated after this discussion until I can't wait to get back and share with my colleagues that even as we pass this marijuana bill, please be aware of some of the implications and some of the revelations in terms of what the scientists have already told us and what the researchers have discovered. And so I often think of my mother when I'm trying to decide something personally. She was of the opinion that those who did things that were not in their best interests and didn't know any better, they'd get whipped with the few stripes. But then she said that those who knew better and did it anyway, that they would get whipped with many stripes. And so I often feel guilty if I eat something that I really know I shouldn't have eaten, or too much of it, or if I miss taking my pills. My wife says I'm a walking pharmacy because I sometimes just carry mine along with me, so that if I forget it one time, I do it again. But let me just thank all of you, Dr. Pete, Dr. Graham, Dr. Williams, Dr. Mason, Dr. Jasmine, Dr. Miller, Dr. Everett, Dr. Hampton. And, you know, Dr. Miller, we talked about Trinity, but I know the Baptists do some stuff too. I know you're a Baptist. So the Baptists do some stuff too. There was a great press conference yesterday at your brother's church in terms of a group of community leaders getting together to suggest that as we get the vaccines and as they really come online, let's make sure that the distribution is done in such a way that those communities that have been impacted the most be recipients and early recipients, and that there be fairness across the board. And I give the Sun-Times a great deal of credit because they ran a full page almost story on the activity. So tell your brother, the Reverend Dr. Johnny Miller, that we appreciate what was going on at the JLM Center on yesterday. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully see you next week. And I'm going to head on into Washington tomorrow and vote on that marijuana bill.
So as we remind you guys, every Monday night, we'll see you here, same bat time, same bat channel at 7 p.m. So remember to chime on in and visit us here. But most of all, we remind you every Monday to do what? Make sure that you wash your hands. Wash your hands, get all in there. Remember to sing the song, the birthday song, whatever you need to do to wash those hands. Remember to social distance. Stretch your arms out. And if you are touching someone and they are touching you, just ask them to scoot over just a little bit to make sure that we all are happy. And most of all, remember to wear your face covering. Wear your face covering and make sure that it is worn properly over your nose and mouth, keeping those droplets only to yourself and not accepting anyone else's, because the life you save may be your very own. Until next Monday, see you then. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all. Thank you.